Okay, so let me walk you through some code that's going to form the basis for our next mini project. Okay, so this code is going to replicate something that we did on Snap, and that is a number guessing game. So remember the basic rules of this simple, very simple game. The computer is going to generate a random number in a certain range. The user is going to have a certain number of guesses to try to find that number. And then along the way, the computer is going to keep track of how many times they guessed, if they guess the right number, etc., until they either guess the right number or run out of guesses. Okay, so very simple game. So let's implement that. Now, when we implement it in Python, we're going to use, or we're going to implement, I should say, several advanced features. So one of those is going to be user input validation. So we're going to check, first of all, is the input that the user typed in, is it a number? In other words, does it have only digits, no alphanumeric characters? Then if it is it in the right range? Then if it's in the right range, has the user guessed it already? Okay, we're going to keep track of what they guessed already. And so if they try to guess the same number again, we're going to alert them to that, and we're not going to dock them a guess for that. Okay, and then finally, if it passes all those checks, then we're going to see, does it match the secret number? And if it does, of course, they win the game. The game is over. If it doesn't, then we use up one of their guesses and we have them guess again. Okay, so it's going to involve input validation. It's also going to involve keeping track of the previous guesses. So we want to make sure that if the user guesses the same number again, that they don't get docked for that. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at how that works. Now, in the previous video, I showed you the random number module. So we have to import it. We import random so that we can take advantage of all of that code that other people have already written that does a lot of things with random numbers. Okay, then we have some basic setup. So we're going to generate the random number, the secret number, and we use the random.choice function. We use range 1 through 11. So this will, as you saw in the previous random number video, this will generate it'll generate a random number in the range 1 through 10. Remember, it stops 1 before that second parameter. We set the number of guesses, so they're going to have 5 guesses. This variable, num guesses, is going to keep track of how many guesses they've used up so far, which at this point is 0. We're going to make a list called past guesses that's initially empty. And this list is going to keep track of what they've already guessed so that we can check it, and if they try to guess the same number again, we can let them know that you've already guessed it, and we're not going to dock you for it. And then we have our flag variable, game over, which initially is false. Okay, so this is the setup. Then we hit the main game loop. This is the while loop. So we've seen this not operator before. It's kind of like a negative sign for Boolean values. So if a Boolean value is true, not of that variable will be false. And if a value is false, not of that value will be true. So not is sort of like a negative sign. It just reverses, in this case, the true and the false. So if it's false, not that will be true, and vice versa. So initially, game over is going to be false. We've initially set it to false because the game isn't over yet, hasn't even started. So not false will be true. And remember, a while loop keeps going as long as a condition is true. So it'll go into the loop and get started. First thing it does in the loop is ask for a guess, and it's going to store it in this variable called guess. And then, as you can see here, we hit a cascading series of checks. So this is all our input validation and our check to see whether the game is won or not. So we got these nested conditionals. Remember, if you have a conditional inside another, that's called nested, and that's how you can get kind of this sophisticated behavior. So it hits the first check. So the first conditional checks whether or not it's a number. In other words, does it consist of only digits, or does it have like letters and other symbols mixed in there? So there's a built-in Python function called isNumeric that'll check that for us. And this is how we call it, guess.isNumeric. It's a function, so we need some parentheses. Even though we don't give it any parameters, we still need that because it's a function. So this will give us either true or false. It's Boolean, so it'll be either true or false. If it's true, that means it only has digits inside of it. If it's false, it means it has other characters and symbols also. So if it passes this check, so in other words, if it's all digits, hit the main block. Next thing we do is we convert it to a number. Initially, when it reads it in, it's what's called a string. So it just treats it as if it's just a random piece of text. If we want to treat it as if it's a number, we have to convert it. So we convert it to an integer using this function, int. So we make it into a number. Then we hit our next series of checks. So the next check checks to see whether or not the guess is in the right range. So in this case, I generated a number 1 through 10. So we're going to check whether the guess is in the range 1 through 10. So this next conditional checks that. So hits this is guess value, if guess value is greater than or equal to 1 and guess value less than or equal to 10. Okay, that means it's in the right range. So we hit the next block. Hit another check. So the next check, now that we know that it's a number and it's in the right range, then we check has the user already guessed it. So that's where this line comes in, if guess value in past guesses. So remember, past guesses is this list that we're going to store all the guesses that the user has already used, all the numbers that they've already guessed. So if you want to check whether or not a certain value is in a list, it's actually really easy operation to do in Python. Some languages you got to write a loop and you gotta put some code in, but for Python they make it really easy. So if I say if guess value in past guesses, what this means is check the past guesses list to see whether guess value is one of those numbers inside of it. Okay, if it's true, if guess value is one of the numbers in past guesses, if they've already guessed it, in other words, then we let them know, print out a message telling them that they've already guessed it. If it's not, so if they haven't guessed it already, so if what they've guessed is not in our past guesses list, then we have another check. So then finally we're at the point where we can check, is the number that they guessed the right number? So does it match the secret value, secret number? So if it doesn't match the secret number, okay, that's what this says. Remember, this is not equal to. So if it doesn't match the secret number, they've guessed wrongly, we let them know. So you've guessed incorrectly. We take away one of their guesses. So the number of guesses that they've used, we increase that by 1. So we take away one of their guesses. And then this line right here puts the number that they've guessed in the past guesses list. So we store what they've just guessed in that list. So next time around, we can check to see that they don't guess it again. Okay, remember, a pen just adds it on the end. Okay, and then this print statement just tells them how many guesses they have left. So guesses allowed minus num guesses, that's how many they have left, and it just prints that out for them. Okay, so it hits this block if it passes all the checks, but it doesn't match the secret number. Okay, and then we have finally this last else here. So this else is part of this big conditional that starts here. So this conditional starts here, then you have another else if that goes here, and then you have an else. This is still part of that big conditional block. So it hits this else if it actually does match the secret number. So if it does match the secret number, then you congratulate them. You add up their guesses, so you update the number of guesses that they took, and then you print out a message that tells them how many guesses it took. It took you a certain number of guesses to get the right number. Okay, and then we set the game over flag to be true, because now at this point the game is over. They've won. So the game is over, so we don't want them to go through the loop again. Okay, then we hit a bunch of these else's. So let's be clear where these are part of. So if you look at the editor, gives this kind of vertical, thin, pale vertical line that helps you line stuff up. So that else is part of this conditional. So this conditional that started up here that checked if the guess was in the right range. If it wasn't in the right range, then it's going to hit this else right here. So this else gets hit if the number they guessed is not in the right range. And so it tells them your guess must be between 1 and 10. Then we hit another else. So this else is part of this initial big if that started all the way up here, which checked if the user guessed something that had just digits in it. So if it doesn't have just digits, if it has other characters, it's going to come down here and hit this else. Okay, this else, it'll tell them your guess must be a number and not contain any non-numerical characters. Okay, so this gets executed if what they initially guessed had letters and other symbols in it. Okay, so all of this huge block here that starts here in line 17 and doesn't finish until you get down to basically line 45. this block right here is just this cascading series of checks. Okay, that's the heart of the game. Okay, and then once it gets through all of that, then we're going to check whether they've exceeded their allowed number of guesses. So if num guesses greater than or equal to guesses allowed, they've run out of guesses, and you let them know you run out of guesses, and you also said game over to be true because they've lost the game at this point. The game is over and they've lost. They've run out of guesses. Okay, so remember, we're still in the while loop at this point because these are all indented. This is still part of the whole while loop block. Okay, so once it gets through that, then it's going to come back up here, back to the start of the loop and check game over. Okay, if game over is true, not game over will be false, and then the while loop ends. If game over is still false, not game over will be true, and then it'll go through the loop again one more time. Okay, so if the game is over, the while loop ends, it finally gets down to line 53, the game is over, and it prints, tells you what the secret number was. So this lets you know what the answer was. Okay, and then we're done. Okay, so that's the program. Okay, now, by the way, I was just thinking about it. You might be wondering, just totally aside, on some of my print statements, I have that \n. You might be wondering what that is. That's a new line character. And what it does is it prints an extra blank line. So if you want to space things out vertically, you don't want them all scrunched up together, you can put that character in and that'll kind of space things out vertically. So it just makes the printing on the console a little nicer. All right, so let's run this thing and let's see what it does. So let's put it through its paces. Okay, so let's run it. Now let's debug it. So that means we want to not only feed it valid input, we want to test all the input validation stuff we put in. So first, let's test, what if we put in just random letters? Okay, it should catch that. It shouldn't crash. It should catch that and let me know. Okay, which it does. Your guess must be a number and not contain any non-numerical characters. Okay, so it passes that check. So that check works. So if we give it something that's not a number, that check works. Okay, now let's test if we give it a number not in the right range. So we're supposed to give it a number 1 through 10. What if I give it 0? Okay, good, so it flags it. Your guess must be between 1 and 10, and it asks me again. What if I give it a number too big? What if I give it, say, 12? Okay, there we go, so it checks that also. Your guess must be between 1 and 10 inclusive. Guess again. Okay, so now let's give it a valid guess. So let's say I give it 5. Okay, at this point, it tells me it's incorrect, and it tells me I have 4 guesses left. So when I guessed these wrong things, when I put in random text or when I guessed outside the range, it didn't penalize me for that. And that's kind of what you want it to do. You don't want to penalize the user for accidentally typing something in that's not quite right. Okay, so we still have 4 guesses left, incorrect. So it sends me back in, guess again. So let's say I'll say 8. Incorrect. You have 3 guesses left. Okay, now let's test. It's also supposed to catch if I try to put in the same answer that I already guessed. So in the previous answer, I guessed 8. So let me try 8 again. Okay, so now notice it flags it. You already guessed that number. Try again. Okay, so it catches that. So let's try 3. Okay, incorrect. Now notice it didn't penalize me for trying 8 again. So before I tried 8 the second time, I had 3 guesses. Tried 8, told me it was wrong. I tried another number. Now I have 2. So it didn't penalize me when I guessed the same answer twice. Okay, so let's try 9. Wrong. Let's try 1. Okay, so I run out of guesses. So I guessed the wrong answers all the way through. So I lost the game. The right number was 7. Okay, so it tells me that. Okay, so it seems to work. It seems to work relatively straightforwardly. Now, we haven't yet tested whether or not it works if I guess the right number. Okay, so how are we going to do that? Well, here's some tips on when you're debugging things like games or you have some random values in. So the secret number we set to be a random value. For the purposes of testing and debugging, let's actually hard code it in. So I'm going to comment out that line just temporarily. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hard code in what my answer should be. So I'm going to hard code in an answer of 5 just to make sure we can check to see whether the game works if we guess the right answer. Okay, so let's run it. So let's first guess something that's not right. So let's guess 8. Incorrect. You have 4 guesses left. So now let's guess the right answer, 5. Okay, and it says, congratulations, you guessed your secret number. It took you 2 guesses. Secret number was 5. Okay, so that works. So if you're in the position of trying to debug and test something that has some randomness in it, one thing you can do is just hard code the answer in. So what I'll do is I'll go back in, I'll take that out. I know it works now, and I can now just put in the random stuff back in. Okay, so there we go. So there's our number guessing game. Now, elements of this you're going to find useful in our next assignment, our next little mini project, because this input validation, keeping track of past guesses, all of this is going to be useful in a lot of scenarios, in particular our next assignment. Okay, so make sure you take a look at the code yourself, you poke around, you play around, you understand how it works.